Natalie Rivers had perfected the art of being forgettable in Clearwater Falls, Montana, and that invisibility had kept her alive for 7 years. The mountain town nestled between the Rockies and endless pine forests was the kind of place where secrets stayed buried under layers of snow and small-town politeness, where the biggest excitement was usually the annual harvest festival, and nobody questioned why the quiet waitress at Mabel's diner never talked about her past. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But every morning at 4:30 a.m., before the first frost-covered pickup truck pulled into the diner's gravel parking lot, the people of Clearwater Falls heard something that didn't quite fit their peaceful mountain routine. From the woods behind Natalie's small cabin came the sound of someone moving through darkness with the precision of a machine, practicing movements that had nothing to do with serving coffee and everything to do with killing efficiently. Before we continue this story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this tale grips you like it has thousands of others, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow, we've got something even more intense waiting for you. Natalie was 29, but her pale green eyes held the weight of someone who had seen too much and survived things that officially never happened. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a practical bun, and she moved through the diner with the fluid efficiency of someone whose every gesture was calculated. She wore the same uniform every day, dark jeans, non-slip shoes, and a red Mabel's Diner t-shirt that concealed the intricate network of surgical scars across her back and shoulders. Scars that told stories no small-town waitress should know. The residents of Clearwater Falls had their theories about Natalie Rivers, naturally. Mabel Harrison, the 70-year-old diner owner, suspected she was hiding from an abusive ex-husband. Sheriff Tom Brunnan, who occupied booth 4 every morning at exactly 6:15, thought she might be in witness protection. The younger locals whispered she'd been military, pointing to the way she instinctively positioned herself near exits and how her hand would drift toward her hip whenever strangers entered. Unexpectedly, but Natalie deflected questions with the skill of someone trained in counter-interrogation techniques. She was friendly but not personal, helpful but never revealing, and expert at redirecting conversation with a smile that was warm but carefully controlled. What the good people of Clearwater Falls didn't know was that their quiet waitress possessed skills that would terrify them. Hidden beneath her cabin's reinforced floorboards, accessible through a concealed entrance behind her wood-burning stove, lay a cache that would make Delta Force operators envious. Advanced weaponry, encrypted communication equipment, survival gear, and enough explosives to level half the town. Every piece of equipment was military grade, acquired through channels that didn't exist on any official records. In the center of that hidden arsenal hung a tactical vest with a name stitched inside the collar. Ghost. It was a call sign she hadn't heard spoken aloud in 7 years. A remnant of a life that had been officially erased when Operation Crimson Dawn went catastrophically wrong in the mountains of Afghanistan. 22 elite operators had gone in to eliminate a high-value target. Only 3 had walked out alive, and their sacrifice had been buried under so many layers of classification that even their families believed they were dead. Every Sunday night, when Mabel's Diner closed and Clearwater Falls settled into its weekend quiet, Natalie would descend into that hidden chamber and run through combat exercises in complete darkness. Her hands would move across weapons with the familiarity of old lovers, and for those brief moments, the careful mask she wore would slip. She wasn't Natalie Rivers, the friendly waitress who remembered everyone's coffee preferences and always had a kind word for the local kids. She was someone else, entirely someone who had been trained to infiltrate, eliminate, and vanish without leaving a trace. The town's morning rhythm was as predictable as the sunrise over Glacier Peak. At 5:45 a.m., Natalie would unlock Mabel's front door and start the coffee brewing. By 6 o'clock, the first of the logging crews would arrive, stamping snow from their boots and filling the air with talk of timber quotas and weather concerns. At 6:15, Sheriff Brennan would settle into his usual booth with his usual order: black coffee, sourdough toast, and scrambled eggs with cheese. Natalie moved through these interactions like water. Present but untouchable, efficient but emotionally distant. She remembered every regular's order without writing anything down, anticipated their needs before they voiced them, and navigated personal questions with the skill of someone trained to extract information while revealing nothing. Mabel often watched her star employee with a mixture of admiration and concern. The woman was the best waitress she'd ever employed, never late, never sick, never distracted. But there was something almost mechanical about her perfection, as if she was playing a role rather than living a life. Sometimes Mabel caught glimpses of something deeper: the way Natalie's entire body would tense when certain vehicles drove past the window, or how she could calculate complex bills in her head while simultaneously monitoring every conversation in the diner. "You've got sharp instincts," Mabel had said once, watching Natalie diffuse a heated argument between two drunk miners without raising her voice or calling for backup. "Natural talent for reading people." "Experience," Natalie had replied simply, already moving to refill coffee cups at the next table. Sheriff Brennan had his own observations. In his 19 years of law enforcement, he'd developed an eye for people who were more than they appeared. Natalie Rivers registered on his radar like a low-frequency alarm, not dangerous exactly, but definitely not what she seemed. Her situational awareness was too sharp, her physical conditioning too precise for someone whose most demanding daily activity was carrying coffee pots. He'd run her identification through every database he could access. And while Natalie Rivers existed on paper Social Security number, birth certificate, employment history, it all felt somehow constructed. Too clean and linear for a real person's complicated life. When he'd asked her once about her family, she'd simply said, "I prefer to focus on the present," and changed the subject so smoothly he didn't realize what had happened until hours later. Truth was that Natalie Rivers had been meticulously crafted 7 years ago by people who specialized in creating identities for those who needed to disappear completely. The woman who served coffee at Mabel's diner was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction, designed to be unremarkable, enough to avoid attention while providing sufficient documentation to satisfy casual scrutiny. But underneath that fabricated identity lived someone far more dangerous, a former Delta Force operator who had participated in the most classified missions in recent military history. Ghost had earned her call sign through an uncanny ability to appear and disappear at will, to become whoever the mission required her to be. She had operated in 17 countries, eliminated targets that threatened American security, and completed missions that would never appear in any official record. On this particular Wednesday morning, as winter storm clouds gathered over the Montana peaks, Natalie felt a familiar tension building in the air. Not just weather, but something else, the kind of atmospheric pressure that preceded significant change. She had learned to trust these instincts during her years in special operations, where the difference between paranoia and survival was often measured in heartbeats. As she refilled Sheriff Brennan's coffee cup for the second time, Natalie's trained senses detected something unusual. The sound of vehicles approaching from the mountain highway, not local trucks or tourist RVs, but something with a different engine signature, heavier, more precise, moving with the kind of coordination that made her blood run cold. Through Mabel's front window, she watched 3 black SUVs navigate the winding road into town, their formation and timing screaming federal operation. No visible license plates from this distance, but the spacing and synchronized movement patterns were unmistakable to someone with her background. Natalie's grip tightened almost imperceptibly on the coffee pot as the vehicle slowed near the town center. After 7 years of perfect invisibility, something had found her in Clearwater Falls, Montana. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, and then her experience. When the past came looking for you in a small mountain town, it usually meant someone was about to die. The 3 black SUVs disappeared around the bend in the mountain highway, but Natalie's instincts screamed that they hadn't gone far. After 7 years of hypervigilance disguised as small-town routine, she could read the subtle signs that most people missed. The way birds had gone silent in the trees near the road, the unusual radio chatter she caught fragments of through the diner's old AM radio, and most telling of all, the fact that no local recognized those vehicles. Wednesday morning continued with its usual rhythm, but Natalie moved through her tasks with heightened awareness. She refilled coffee cups while mentally cataloging every exit route from the diner. She took breakfast orders while monitoring the parking lot through peripheral vision. She smiled and chatted with regulars while her mind calculated response times and tactical advantages. "You seem jumpy today," observed Mabel, emerging from the kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee and the kind of maternal concern that had made Natalie both grateful and uncomfortable for 7 years. "Something bothering you, honey?" "Just keeping an eye on the weather," Natalie replied smoothly, gesturing toward the darkening clouds that were gathering over Glacier Peak. "Storm looks like it could be a big one. Might want to make sure we have enough supplies if the power goes out." Mabel followed her gaze, but Natalie knew the older woman was studying her face more than the sky. "Weather Service said it might just be a light snow. Nothing we haven't handled before." She paused, her gray eyes sharp with intuition. "You sure that's all it is? You've been moving different today, more alert, like you're expecting trouble." Natalie's training kicked in automatically. Deflect, redirect, maintain cover at all costs. You know how it is when the pressure drops before a storm. Makes everyone a little edgy. She managed a convincing smile while internally calculating how quickly she could reach the emergency beacon hidden beneath the cash register. Besides, Tom's been telling those fishing stories again. Enough to make anyone nervous. From booth 4, Sheriff Brennan looked up from his newspaper with mock indignation. "Hey now, that was a legitimate 15-pound trout, and you know it." "Sure it was, Sheriff," Natalie called back, grateful for the familiar banter that helped mask her growing tension. "Just like last month's monster bass that somehow got smaller every time you told the story." The easy humor felt surreal given the adrenaline coursing through her system. But it was necessary camouflage. These people had unknowingly protected her for 7 years simply by accepting her as part of their daily routine. Their normalcy was her shield, their trust her armor against a world that wanted her dead. At 9:45 a.m. During the lull between breakfast and the coffee break crowd, Natalie's surveillance was rewarded. A sedan pulled into the diner's parking lot, not one of the black SUVs, but driven with the same careful precision. 2 men emerged, dressed like traveling salesmen but moving with the controlled awareness that screamed military training. They entered Mabel's diner with casual confidence, their eyes automatically sweeping the room to identify threats and exits. Professional, but not quite good enough to fool someone with Natalie's background. She spotted the telltale signs immediately, the slight bulge of concealed weapons, the way they chose a table with clear sightlines to all entrances, and the microsecond pause as they assessed every person in the room. "Morning, gentlemen," Natalie said, approaching their table with coffee pot in hand and a smile that never wavered. "What can I get you started with today?" "Coffee would be great," the taller one replied, his accent carrying hints of Texas. "We're just passing through. Heard this place has the best breakfast in the county." Natalie poured their coffee with steady hands while her mind raced through possibilities. These weren't the primary team, they were scouts, gathering intelligence before the main force moved in. The fact that they were being subtle meant the operation was still in the reconnaissance phase. "Well, you heard right," she said cheerfully. "Mabel's been perfecting her recipes for 40 years. You gentlemen have any particular favorites? We've got excellent pancakes, and our hash browns are famous around here." "Actually," the shorter man interjected, "we're more interested in the local history. Heard there might be some interesting stories about people who've made this place home after, shall we say, extensive travels." The phrase was carefully constructed, designed to probe without being specific. Natalie recognized the technique from her own intelligence training. They were fishing, testing to see if she'd react to coded language that might resonate with someone from her background. "Oh, Clearwater Falls has its share of folks who came here looking for a quieter life," Natalie replied, maintaining her friendly waitress persona while every nerve in her body went on high alert. "Mountains have a way of attracting people who value privacy and peace." "More coffee?" She refilled their cups while memorizing every detail, the way the tall one kept his right hand positioned near his hip, the nearly invisible earpiece in the shorter man's left ear, the fact that neither had actually touched their coffee despite ordering it specifically. "That's interesting," the tall one pressed gently. "We're particularly curious about people with specialized backgrounds, maybe military service, security work, that sort of thing." The directness of the question confirmed Natalie's assessment. These weren't random travelers asking innocent questions. They knew something, had some piece of intelligence that had led them to Clearwater Falls, and they were systematically testing her responses. "Well, you might want to talk to Sheriff Brennan over there," she said, nodding toward Booth 4. "He served 2 tours in Iraq, loves sharing stories with anyone who'll listen. Real American hero, that one." "Sheriff Brennan," the shorter man repeated, filing the name away. "Anyone else? Maybe someone who served more recently, in more specialized units." The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Natalie felt the weight of 7 years of careful construction balanced on her response. Too much knowledge would expose her. Too little might seem suspicious to men who were clearly skilled at reading people. "Can't say I know anyone like that off the top of my head," she said, with the perfect blend of helpfulness and ignorance. "But folks around here tend to keep their business to themselves. Privacy's one of the things people love about mountain living." The 2 men exchanged a glance that lasted just a fraction too long. They were communicating, sharing information through micro-expressions and subtle signals that most civilians would never notice. "Well, we appreciate the coffee and the conversation," the tall one said, leaving a $20 bill on the table, far too much for 2 cups of coffee, and clearly intended to ensure they'd be remembered favorably as they left. Natalie watched through the window as they walked to their sedan with the measured pace of people who were in no hurry but had somewhere specific to go. They sat in the car for several minutes, making phone calls and taking notes, before driving slowly out of town on the mountain highway. Mabel appeared at Natalie's shoulder, her weathered face creased with concern. "Odd fellows. Didn't drink their coffee, asked strange questions. You know them from somewhere?" "Never seen them before in my life," Natalie replied, but her mind was already racing through contingency plans she'd hoped never to use. The scouts would report back to their handlers. Decisions would be made about next steps. And very soon, the carefully constructed world of Natalie Rivers would face its ultimate test. She spent the next hour serving the lunch crowd while internally preparing for war. Every smile was calculated, every conversation monitored for intelligence value, every movement designed to maintain the facade while she mentally accessed 7 years' worth of emergency protocols through the diner's windows. She could see storm clouds continuing to build over the mountains, but the real storm was already here. After 7 years of perfect invisibility, Something had found Ghost in the mountains of Montana. And if there was one thing Natalie Rivers had learned during her years in Delta Force, it was that when your cover was blown, you had two choices: run fast and far, or make sure the people hunting you regretted finding you. As the afternoon wore on and the first snowflakes began to fall, Natalie realized she was tired of running. Maybe it was time to remind the world why they used to call her Ghost. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of deceptive calm that Natalie had learned to distrust during her years in hostile territory. The overnight snowfall had blanketed Clearwater Falls in pristine white, transforming the mountain town into a picture-perfect postcard that masked the underlying tension she could feel building like pressure in a sealed container. She arrived at Mabel's diner at 5:30 a.m. as usual, but her routine had shifted in subtle ways that would be invisible to casual observers. Her route to work now included 3 different counter-surveillance checks. Her keys were positioned for rapid access to emergency supplies, and the small of her back concealed a Glock 26 that hadn't seen daylight in 7 years. The morning crowd filtered in with their usual predictability, but Natalie noticed additional details now. The way Jake Morrison's logging truck had a different parking angle that gave him a clear view of the highway. How elderly Mrs. Patterson seemed more alert than usual as she nursed her coffee and watched the street. Small changes that could mean nothing, or could indicate that yesterday's scouts had left more than just tire tracks in the snow. At 7:15 a.m., her surveillance paid off. A utility van pulled into the diner's parking lot, marked with Mountain Power and Electric logos that looked professionally painted, but sat slightly wrong to Natalie's trained eye. The spacing of the letters was off. The company phone number used a prefix that didn't match local exchanges, and most tellingly, the van was too clean for a vehicle that should have been working. Mountain roads in winter conditions. 2 men in coveralls entered the diner, carrying clipboards and moving with the purposeful stride of workers on a mission. But their boots were too expensive, their coveralls too new, and their eyes too careful as they scanned the room. Professional operators conducting what military intelligence called a soft probe, gathering information while maintaining plausible cover. "Morning, fellas," Natalie called out cheerfully, coffee pot already in hand. "What brings you out so early? Power trouble somewhere?" "Routine maintenance," the bearded one replied, his voice carrying traces of an East Coast accent that didn't belong in rural Montana. "Checking lines before the next storm system moves through. Mind if we grab some coffee while we review our work orders?" "Of course. Mabel's got fresh biscuits coming out of the oven in 10 minutes if you're interested." Natalie poured their coffee while noting details that would have escaped civilian attention. The way the clean-shaven operative's right shoulder sat slightly higher than his left, indicating a shoulder holster. How both men positioned themselves to maintain visual contact with each other and clear lines of sight to all exits. The fact that their clipboards contained blank forms rather than actual work orders. "Appreciate it," the bearded man said, settling into a booth near the window. "Say we're new to this route. You know if there are any, permanent residents we should be aware of? Sometimes folks get nervous about utility workers on their property, especially if they value their privacy." The question was more direct than yesterday's probe, suggesting their intelligence had improved overnight. Someone had given them reason to focus their search parameters, possibly provided them with additional targeting information. "Well, most folks around here are pretty friendly," Natalie replied, maintaining her helpful waitress persona while mentally cataloging potential threats and escape routes. "Though I suppose some of the old-timers who live up in the hills can be a bit territorial. Been here so long they consider themselves part of the landscape. Anyone in particular we should know about?" The clean-shaven operative pressed. "We heard there might be someone with a military background, someone who might be experienced with security concerns." Natalie felt the familiar cold clarity that had kept her alive through 17 classified missions. They weren't fishing anymore. They had specific intelligence that led them to believe a former military operator was living in Clearwater Falls. The question was how much they knew and whether they'd identified her specifically. Military background? She tilted her head with the perfect expression of small-town curiosity. Well, Sheriff Brennan served in Iraq like I mentioned to those other fellas yesterday. And old Pete Kowalski up on Timber Ridge was Navy back in Vietnam. Real character. That one still flies his flag every morning at 0600 sharp. The two operatives exchanged a glance that lasted just long enough to confirm they were communicating through established signals. The bearded one pulled out a cell phone and began typing what appeared to be a text message, but was more likely an encrypted status report. Other fellas? The clean-shaven man asked casually. Someone else asking about military folks? Natalie's smile never wavered, but internally she noted how quickly they'd focused on that detail. Professional curiosity combined with operational necessity. They needed to know who else was asking questions and whether their operation had been compromised. Oh, just a couple of travelers yesterday. Seemed like nice enough guys, said they were interested in local history. She refilled their coffee cups while studying their reactions. Don't get many strangers through here, especially not 3 groups in 2 days. Must be something special about our little town. The comment was designed to test whether they knew about the black SUVs from the previous day. The micro-tension that passed between them confirmed they were part of a coordinated operation, multiple teams working different angles of the same intelligence objective. 3 groups? The bearded operative asked, his tone carefully neutral. Well, there were those government-looking vehicles that came through Tuesday, then your folks yesterday, and now you utility boys today. Natalie's tone remained conversational, but she was feeding them information to gauge their responses. Like I said, unusual amount of traffic for Clearwater Falls. She watched as the clean-shaven man's hand drifted unconsciously toward his hip, a stress response that indicated her mention of the government vehicles had struck a nerve. Either they weren't coordinating properly with other teams, or something about Tuesday's reconnaissance had gone differently than planned. From behind the counter, Mabel appeared with a plate of fresh biscuits, her maternal instincts clearly triggered by the unusual number of questions about her employee. Everything all right out here, honey? These gentlemen need anything else? Just coffee, ma'am, the bearded operative replied. Beautiful town you have here. Must be peaceful. Everyone knowing everyone else's business. Oh, we look out for each other, Mabel said with the kind of protective pride that had made Natalie both grateful and nervous for 7 years. Especially for folks who've come here looking for a fresh start. We believe in letting people write their own stories, if you know what I mean. The comment hung in the air like a warning shot. Mabel might not know the specifics of Natalie's background, but her protective instincts were clearly engaged. Small-town solidarity was about to become a factor in whatever operation these men were running. That's admirable, the clean-shaven man said, but his tone had shifted slightly. They were realizing that extracting information in Clearwater Falls might be more complicated than anticipated. Local loyalty could interfere with their intelligence gathering, make residents less cooperative and more suspicious. Sheriff Brennan chose that moment to enter the diner, his presence immediately changing the atmospheric pressure in the room. His eyes swept the utility workers with the professional assessment of someone trained to read threats. And Natalie could see him cataloging the same details she'd noticed, the 2 new coveralls, the expensive boots, the way both men had positioned themselves tactically rather than casually. Morning, Nat, Mabel, Brennan nodded to them before focusing on the strangers. Don't believe I've seen you boys before. Tom Brennan, County Sheriff. You working on something specific in my jurisdiction? The direct challenge forced the operatives to produce their cover. Documentation work orders that Natalie could see were professionally forged, but wouldn't stand up to serious scrutiny. The bearded man handed over paperwork while maintaining eye contact that suggested he was accustomed to dealing with local law enforcement. Routine maintenance, Sheriff. Checking power lines before the next storm system. Mountain Power sent us up from Billings to make sure everything's secure. Brennan studied the paperwork with the thoroughness of someone who'd learned not to take documentation at face value. Mountain Power, huh? Funny thing, I called them last week about a line down near Miller's Creek. And they said they wouldn't have crews available for maintenance work until after the snow season ended. The challenge was polite, but pointed. And Natalie watched the two operatives recalibrate their approach in real time. They'd underestimated small-town law enforcement, assumed they could conduct their intelligence gathering without serious scrutiny from local authorities. Must be a different division, the clean-shaven man said smoothly. Emergency crews handle storm damage, but preventive maintenance runs on a different schedule. I suppose that makes sense, Brennan replied, but his tone indicated he wasn't entirely convinced. How long are you boys planning to be in the area? Just today, probably, the bearded operative answered. Depends on what we find during our survey. Natalie poured the sheriff his usual coffee while monitoring the conversation for intelligence value. The operatives were being forced to commit to specific timelines and cover stories, information she could use to predict their next moves and prepare accordingly. Well, you be careful up in those mountains, Brennan warned. Weather Service is predicting another storm system moving in tonight. Wouldn't want you boys to get caught up there if conditions deteriorate. The conversation continued for another few minutes before the utility workers finished their coffee and left. But not before the bearded operative made one final attempt at intelligence gathering. Say, Sheriff, that military experience you mentioned, anyone else around here with similar backgrounds? Always good to know who might be able to help out if we run into trouble in rough terrain. Brennan's expression didn't change, but Natalie caught the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated his suspicions were fully engaged. Most folks who served keep that to themselves. We respect privacy around here. After the operatives left, Brennan lingered at the counter longer than usual. His attention focused on Natalie with the kind of professional interest that made her pulse quicken. Lot of strangers asking questions lately, he observed quietly. 3 different groups in 3 days, all of them curious about military folks. That seem odd to you? Natalie met his gaze steadily while her mind raced through response options. Small towns always attract curiosity, Sheriff. Maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe, Brennan agreed, but his tone suggested he believed in coincidence about as much as she did. But if it's not coincidence, if someone's looking for something specific, well, I'd want to know about it. Professional courtesy, you understand. The implication was clear, Sheriff Tom. Brennan had connected enough dots to realize something significant was happening in his jurisdiction. And he was offering to help protect whatever or whoever was being hunted. As he left the diner, Natalie realized her 7 years of perfect invisibility were crumbling faster than she'd anticipated. Multiple teams were conducting coordinated intelligence operations. Local law enforcement was becoming suspicious. And the community that had unknowingly sheltered her was starting to rally in her defense. The positive her was starting to rally in her defense. Next phase would determine whether Natalie Rivers could maintain her cover long enough to identify the true nature of the threat, or whether Ghost would have to emerge from the shadows to protect the people who had given her a home. Friday morning shattered the illusion of normalcy when Natalie arrived at Mabel's diner, to find the parking lot occupied by vehicles that made no attempt at subtlety. 3 black suburban SUVs sat arranged in a tactical formation that any military professional would recognize as a containment pattern. Men in dark suits stood at strategic positions around the building, their postures screaming federal agents. Despite the civilian clothes, the charade was over. Natalie paused at the edge of the parking lot. her hand instinctively moving toward the concealed weapon at her back before she forced herself to maintain the appearance of a confused small-town waitress. Through the diner's front windows, she could see her regular customers seated at their usual tables. But their body language indicated they were being detained, rather than served breakfast. Sheriff Brennan's patrol car was notably absent from its usual spot in front of the building. A tall man in expensive overcoat emerged from the lead SUV, moving with the controlled confidence of someone accustomed to command authority. Even from a distance, Natalie could see the military bearing in his posture, the way he automatically assessed his surroundings before approaching. This wasn't another intelligence probe, this was the primary operation. And whoever was running it had decided that subtlety was no longer necessary. "Ms. Rivers," the man called out, his voice carrying clearly across the snow-covered parking lot. "My name is Colonel Marcus Reed, Delta Force Special Operations Command. I'd like to have a conversation with you." The use of her assumed name combined with his unit identification sent ice through Natalie's veins. Delta Force didn't conduct domestic operations unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. The fact that a colonel was personally leading this mission meant the situation involved national security implications, far beyond a simple manhunt for a missing operator. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Natalie replied, maintaining her civilian cover even though they both knew it was pointless. "I'm just here to open the diner for breakfast service." Colonel Reed smiled with the kind of professional courtesy that masked absolute determination. "Ma'am, we know exactly who you are. Chief Warrant Officer Natalie Martinez, callsign Ghost, Delta Force 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment. Officially killed in action during Operation Crimson Dawn, Afghanistan, 7 years ago." The sound of her real name spoken aloud after 7 years of careful anonymity hit like a physical blow. Natalie felt the last vestiges of her civilian identity cracking under the weight of military reality. Around the parking lot, she could see Reed's team positioning themselves with professional precision, not threatening, but absolutely ready to prevent any attempt at escape. "That woman is dead," Natalie said quietly. But her posture was already shifting as muscle memory overrode years of careful camouflage. "Has been for 7 years. We know about the official records," Reed replied, taking a step closer while maintaining non-threatening body language. "We also know about the classified extraction protocol that pulled you and 2 other survivors out of Afghanistan after the mission went sideways. We know about the new identity, the protective relocation, the whole 9 yards." Through the diner's windows, Natalie could see Mabel watching the confrontation with obvious distress. The older woman had probably never seen federal agents in her life, and now her quiet employee was apparently the center of a military operation that had descended on Clearwater Falls like an occupying force. "What do you want?" Natalie asked, abandoning any pretense of confusion. Reed's intelligence was too detailed, too specific for denial to serve any purpose. "We need Ghost," Reed said simply. 3 days ago, Colonel James Morrison was captured by hostile forces while conducting a classified operation in Eastern Europe. Morrison was the commanding officer for Operation Crimson Dawn. He has detailed knowledge of extraction protocols, safe house locations, and the current identities of all surviving personnel from that mission. The implications hit Natalie like a sledgehammer. Morrison had been her CO during the Afghanistan disaster, one of the few people who knew the complete scope of the extraction operation that had saved her life. If he'd been captured and compromised, every survivor of Crimson Dawn was now a target. "How long has he been missing?" she asked, her tactical mind automatically shifting into operational mode. 72 hours. Intelligence suggests he's being held by a consortium of foreign actors who specialize in acquiring American military assets for resale to hostile intelligence services. Reed's expression was grim. "They're not just planning to extract information from Morrison. They're planning to auction off everything he knows to the highest bidders. And you think I can help extract him, Natalie said, understanding the real reason for this dramatic revelation of her identity. I think Ghost is the only person alive with the specific skill set necessary to infiltrate the facility where Morrison is being held. Reed pulled out a tablet, showing her satellite imagery of a fortified compound built into mountainous terrain that looked disturbingly familiar. The target is a former Soviet military installation in the Carpathian Mountains, retrofitted as a private prison for high-value detainees. Maximum security, multiple defensive layers, completely isolated from outside assistance. Natalie studied the tactical display while her mind automatically began analyzing approach vectors and defensive vulnerabilities. 7 years of serving coffee hadn't dulled her operational instincts, if anything. The enforced inactivity had left her hungry for the kind of complex challenge that had once defined her existence. "Why me specifically?" she asked, though she was already beginning to understand the answer. "Because you've done it before," Reed replied. December 2015, Romania. You successfully infiltrated and extracted assets from a similar facility under comparable circumstances. That operation was classified so deeply that only 3 people knew the complete details: you, Morrison, and the Secretary of Defense. The memory hit her like a physical blow. The Romanian extraction had been a nightmare of impossible odds and split-second decisions, the kind of mission that left permanent scars on everyone involved. She'd gotten her people out, but the cost had been measured in ways that didn't appear on official casualty reports. "That was different," she said quietly. "I had a full team, unlimited resources, and official sanction. This sounds like you're asking me to go off the books." "The operation exists in a gray area," Reed admitted. Morrison's mission was so classified that acknowledging his capture would compromise ongoing intelligence operations across 3 continents. We can provide equipment and logistical support, but extraction authority is limited. Translation: if something went wrong, Natalie would be completely on her own, with no official backup and no government protection. The kind of mission that either ended in complete success or left everyone involved officially dead, through the diner's windows. She could see her regular customers being allowed to leave, but their faces showed the shock of ordinary people who'd suddenly discovered their quiet waitress was at the center of international military operations. Mabel stood at the counter, her weathered hands gripping a coffee pot like an anchor to a world that no longer made sense. "What about them?" Natalie nodded toward the diner. "These people protected me for 7 years without knowing what they were protecting. They don't deserve to be collateral damage in whatever happens next." "Full security detail for the duration of the operation," Reed promised. "New identities and relocation assistance if necessary. These people will be protected." Natalie felt the weight of 7 years of careful construction balanced against the lives of fellow operators who'd trusted her with their secrets. Morrison had saved her life in Afghanistan, pulled her out of a situation that should have killed everyone involved. The debt she owed him was measured in more than military duty, it was personal. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked, though she was already mentally accessing equipment caches and operational protocols she'd hoped never to use again. "Morrison's intel suggests the auction is scheduled for Sunday night," Reed replied. "If we're going to extract him before his information is sold, we need to move within the next 36 hours. Natalie looked one last time at Mabel's diner, at the community that had unknowingly given her sanctuary, and the peaceful life she'd built one breakfast order at a time. In 36 hours, Chief Warrant Officer Natalie Martinez would either be dead or responsible for saving the lives of every operator who'd survived the Crimson Dawn disaster. "I'll need access to my equipment cache," she said quietly, feeling Ghost stir into life after 7 years of forced hibernation. "And I'll want complete mission parameters before I commit to anything." Colonel Reed smiled with the satisfaction of a man who'd successfully recruited a legend. "Welcome back to active duty, Ghost. Your country needs you one more time." As federal agents began securing the area and transforming Clearwater Falls into a temporary command center, Natalie realized her 7 years as a waitress were officially over. The only question now was whether she could still access the skills that had once made her the most feared extraction specialist in American Special Operations. Mabel appeared at the diner's front door, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. "Natalie, honey, what's happening? Are you in some kind of trouble?" Natalie met the older woman's eyes, feeling the weight of necessary betrayal. "No trouble, Mabel, just an old debt that needs to be paid." As she walked toward the federal vehicles that would take her back into a world she'd thought she'd left forever, Natalie Martinez began mentally preparing for a mission that would either redeem her past or ensure she joined Morrison and whatever hell awaited captured American operators. Ghost was going back to work, the transformation of Clearwater Falls into a military staging area happened with frightening efficiency. Within 6 hours of Colonel Reed's arrival, the quiet mountain town had become a forward operating base, complete with communication arrays, tactical vehicles, and enough firepower to level a small city. Natalie watched the metamorphosis from the passenger seat of an armored Humvee as they drove toward her cabin to retrieve the equipment cache she'd spent 7 years hoping never to touch. But the military's presence had attracted more than just curious locals. Through encrypted communication channels, Reed's intelligence team had intercepted concerning chatter indicating that hostile forces were aware of the operation and moving to intercept. The mission to extract Colonel Morrison had become a race against multiple opposing factions, each with their own agenda and considerable resources. "Contact on Highway 12. Reported Sergeant First Class Diana Torres, Reed's communications specialist, her voice crackling through the tactical radio network. "Civilian vehicles moving in convoy formation, approximately 8 miles out and closing on our position." Reed keyed his radio from the command vehicle following behind them. "Civilian vehicles don't travel in convoy formation through mountain passes in winter, Sergeant." "Classification?" "Unknown, sir. No visual on occupants, but movement patterns suggest tactical coordination. Estimate arrival in 15 minutes. Natalie felt the familiar cold clarity of pre-combat focus settling over her consciousness like a well-worn jacket. After 7 years of enforced civilian routine, the prospect of direct action felt both terrifying and oddly liberating. Her hands moved automatically to check equipment placement and weapons readiness, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. "How much do they know about your cache location?" Reed asked as their convoy turned onto the narrow forest road leading to Natalie's property. "Impossible to say," she replied, her mind automatically calculating defensive positions and escape routes through terrain she knew better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. "The location is hardened against electronic surveillance, but if they've been watching the area long enough, they could have identified patterns." The cabin appeared through the trees exactly as she'd left it, a modest structure that projected the image of a retired waitress, living quietly in the mountains. But Natalie's eyes automatically swept the approaches, looking for signs of disturbance or surveillance that would indicate hostile reconnaissance. "Perimeter's clean," announced Staff Sergeant Mike Collins, Reed's tactical team leader, as his men deployed around the property with professional efficiency. No signs of recent activity, no obvious surveillance equipment. Natalie led them to the concealed entrance behind her wood-burning stove, activating biometric locks that had remained untouched for 7 years. The hidden chamber revealed itself like a military museum, weapons and equipment arranged with obsessive precision. Night vision systems, encrypted communications gear, enough explosives to flatten a city block, and specialized weapons that didn't appear in any civilian catalog. "Jesus," Torres whispered, scanning the arsenal with professional appreciation. "This is enough firepower to outfit a full assault team." "That was the idea," Natalie replied, selecting equipment with movements that felt both foreign and completely natural after years of civilian life. When you disappear from the world's most dangerous job, you plan for the possibility that the world might come looking. Reed examined a custom-modified sniper rifle with obvious admiration. "Romanian extraction. 2015. You used this system to eliminate 6 targets from positions that intelligence said were impossible shots." "Impossible shots are just shots that require proper preparation," Natalie said. "Field stripping the weapon with mechanical precision and acceptable margins for collateral damage." The equipment check was interrupted by Torres's urgent voice over the radio. "Multiple contacts converging on the perimeter. Count 12 vehicles, mixed civilian and commercial, but movement patterns are definitely military. They're setting up a containment formation." Through her cabin's reinforced windows, Natalie could see muzzle flashes in the tree line as Reed's perimeter security engaged incoming hostiles. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed across the mountains, shattering 7 years of peaceful silence with the familiar symphony of combat. "They're not trying to capture," Collins reported, his voice tight with adrenaline. "This is a straight elimination mission. Rules of engagement are weapons-free." Reed coordinated the defensive response while Natalie continued arming herself with equipment she'd once used to alter the balance of power in 3 different continents. The tactical vest felt heavier than she remembered, the weapons more substantial. But the familiar weight was oddly comforting after years of carrying nothing more dangerous than coffee pots. "Ghost, we need to extract your equipment and move to secondary positions," Reed called out as incoming fire intensified. "This location is compromised." Natalie was already loading critical gear into military-grade transport cases, prioritizing equipment based on mission requirements she'd memorized years ago. Communication systems, specialized ammunition, and the kind of tools that turned impossible missions into merely improbable ones. "Secondary positions might not be sufficient," she said, monitoring the tactical situation through her cabin's reinforced observation windows. "These aren't amateurs. Vehicle positioning, fire discipline, coordination. This is a professional military unit operating on foreign soil." The implications were staggering. Someone had deployed what appeared to be a full company of special operations personnel to American soil for the specific purpose of eliminating a single operator. The resources required for such an operation suggested involvement by major foreign intelligence services. "How the hell did they find us so fast?" Torres demanded, coordinating counter-battery fire against hostile positions. "Because they didn't need to find us," Natalie realized, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to coalesce in her mind. "They knew we'd come here the moment Reed revealed my identity. This isn't a pursuit operation, it's a trap." Reed's expression darkened as the tactical implications became clear. "Someone with detailed knowledge of your operational history predicted exactly how we'd respond to Morrison's capture." "Morrison himself," Natalie said quietly, feeling the weight of betrayal settling over her like a lead blanket. "He's not a prisoner being auctioned. He's the architect of an operation designed to eliminate every survivor of Crimson Dawn." The revelation transformed their understanding of the entire mission. Colonel Morrison hadn't been captured by hostile forces, he was working with them. Using his knowledge of extraction protocols and operator psychology to systematically eliminate the witnesses to whatever had really happened during Operation Crimson Dawn 7 years ago. "Contact left," Collins shouted as hostile forces began a coordinated assault on the cabin's defensive perimeter. "Multiple breaches, they're using professional assault tactics." Natalie moved through her cabin with deadly efficiency, selecting weapons and ammunition while hostile rounds shattered windows and punched through walls that had once represented peaceful retirement. The woman who'd served coffee and small-town gossip for 7 years was disappearing, replaced by someone far more dangerous. "We need to break contact and establish overwatch positions," she called to Reed, her tactical mind automatically calculating the kind of fighting retreat that had made her legendary in special operations circles. "This position is indefensible against the force they've deployed." "Negative," Reed replied, coordinating suppressive fire through his radio headset. "We hold here until extraction arrives." "Extraction isn't coming," Natalie said with cold certainty, activating demolition charges she'd placed throughout the cabin years ago as a final security measure. "Morrison knows our protocols, our backup plans, our entire operational doctrine. He's been feeding intelligence to hostile forces for months, maybe years." The explosives detonated in sequence, creating a wall of flame and debris that temporarily disrupted the hostile assault while providing cover for their withdrawal. Natalie led Reed's team through escape routes she'd mapped during hundreds of solitary hikes, moving through terrain that would challenge experienced mountain warfare specialists. "Where are we going?" Reed demanded as they fought their way through increasingly difficult mountain terrain, hostile forces pursuing them with professional persistence. "Somewhere Morrison doesn't know about," Natalie replied, leading them toward a secondary cache location she'd established without official knowledge or documentation. "Somewhere I can access equipment that isn't in any military database." Behind them, Clearwater Falls burned with the kind of violence that transformed peaceful communities into military objectives. The diner where she'd served breakfast for 7 years was probably already destroyed, along with any hope of returning to the quiet life she'd built one customer at a time. "How do we extract Morrison if he's working with the enemy?" Torres asked as they established temporary defensive positions in a rocky outcropping that provided clear fields of fire. "We don't extract him," Natalie said, her voice carrying the kind of cold finality that had once terrified enemies across multiple continents. "We eliminate him and everyone working with him. Morrison wants to auction off the lives of American operators. Let's show him what happens when those operators decide to bid back." As night fell over the Montana mountains, Chief Warrant Officer Natalie Martinez began planning an operation that would either save the remaining survivors of Operation Crimson Dawn or ensure that their betrayal was paid for in blood. The quiet Waitress was gone forever. Ghost had worked to do. The abandoned ranger station, 60 miles north of Clearwater Falls, had been closed for 3 seasons. But its communication equipment remained functional, a fact Natalie had verified during her years of careful preparation. As dawn broke over the Glacier National Forest, she worked with systematic precision to establish encrypted contact with networks that officially didn't exist, calling in favors from people who owed their lives to operations that never appeared in any government records. Reed's team had suffered casualties during their fighting retreat through the mountains. Staff Sergeant Collins was nursing a bullet wound in his shoulder, and 2 of his men required medical attention that their current resources couldn't provide. But they were alive, which was more than could be said for the hostile forces that had pursued them through terrain Natalie knew better than her own reflection. Blackwater Operations. "This is Ghost requesting priority communication channel." Natalie spoke into the military-grade radio system she'd activated using frequencies that changed every 6 hours, according to protocols memorized 7 years ago. Authentication code, Sierra 7 Alpha Crimson. The response came within seconds. A voice she recognized as Major Patricia Vasquez, her former intelligence liaison and one of 3 people who knew the complete truth about what had happened during Operation Crimson Dawn. "Ghost, this is Blackwater Actual. We've been monitoring hostile communications regarding your situation. Status report. Mission parameters have changed," Natalie replied, encrypting her transmission through scramblers that would make their conversation unintelligible to anyone lacking proper decryption keys. Colonel Morrison is not a hostage, he's the primary threat. Repeat, Morrison is hostile and actively engaged in elimination. Operations against Crimson Dawn. Survivors. The silence that followed lasted long. Enough for Natalie to wonder if the communication link had been compromised. When Vasquez finally responded, her voice carried the weight of someone whose worst fears had been confirmed. We suspected as much when the Romanian intelligence services reported unusual activity around former Soviet installations. Morrison's been off the grid for 6 months, officially on medical leave. How much does he know? Everything, Natalie said grimly. Extraction protocols, new identities, current locations of all surviving personnel. He's been feeding intelligence to hostile bidders while planning systematic elimination of witnesses. Reed moved to her shoulder, his expression dark with understanding. How many survivors are we talking about? 12 operators extracted from Crimson Dawn, Vasquez replied through the encrypted channel. 4 confirmed dead in the past 60 days, all apparent accidents. Morrison's accelerating his timeline. The implications were staggering. 8 highly trained special operations personnel scattered across different continents, each living under carefully constructed civilian identities, now marked for death by someone who possessed intimate knowledge of their capabilities and psychological profiles. I need current locations and security status for all remaining assets, Natalie said. Her tactical mind already formulating the kind of complex operation that had once made her legendary in intelligence circles. And I need it offline, through channels Morrison can't access. Negative, Vasquez replied. That information is compartmentalized above your current clearance level. But I can tell you that 3 assets are already in secure facilities. And 2 more have been extracted to safe houses in the past 12 hours. That leaves 3 unaccounted for, Reed observed, monitoring the conversation through a secondary headset. 3 assets who don't know they're being hunted, Natalie corrected. Morrison's selling their locations to the highest bidders while ensuring they can't defend themselves. Classic elimination protocol disguised as intelligence auction. Torres looked up from her communication equipment, her face pale with new intelligence. I'm intercepting traffic on military frequencies. There's a Delta Force unit mobilizing from Fort Bragg, claiming they're responding to a domestic terrorism incident in Montana. Morrison's cleanup crew, Natalie realized, feeling pieces of a larger conspiracy falling into place. He's using official military assets to eliminate witnesses, probably telling them we're rogue. Operators have gone hostile. The betrayal went deeper than personal. Vendetta Morrison was manipulating American military resources to cover up whatever had really happened during Operation Crimson Dawn 7 years ago. The official record claimed the mission had been a tactical success that eliminated a high-value terrorist target. But the operators who'd survived knew the truth was far more complicated. Blackwater Actual, I need authorization for deep cover extraction of remaining assets, Natalie said into her radio. Full operational parameters, unlimited resources, and complete deniability if things go sideways. Ghost, you're asking for authorization to conduct military operations on American soil, Vasquez replied. That's beyond my clearance level, and probably beyond anyone's clearance level who would admit to knowing about Crimson Dawn. Then I'm going off the books, Natalie said with finality. Morrison wants to auction off the lives of American operators. Let's give him something worth bidding on. She began accessing equipment from her secondary cache, gear that had never appeared in any military inventory and couldn't be traced through official channels. Custom weapons, untraceable communication systems, and identification documents that would pass scrutiny in a dozen different countries. What's your plan? Reed asked as she armed herself with the kind of equipment that transformed impossible missions into merely suicidal ones. Morrison's holding his auction tomorrow night at a facility in the Carpathian Mountains, Natalie replied. reviewing intelligence photographs on her ruggedized tablet. Former Soviet installation, maximum security, defended by professional military contractors. He thinks he's untouchable because he's operating in international waters of legal jurisdiction. You can't assault a hardened facility with a four-man team, Collins protested, despite his wounded shoulder. That's not a mission, that's a suicide run. Who said anything about assault? Natalie's smile was sharp as winter steel. Morrison trained me, taught me everything he knows about tactics and strategy. But he made one critical error. He forgot that I learned a few things he never taught me. She activated a secure satellite uplink, accessing networks that existed in the gray areas between official intelligence services and private military contractors. Within minutes, she was coordinating with assets positioned across 3 continents, calling in favors from people who specialized in operations that couldn't be traced to any government. Razor Team. This is Ghost. Authentication Charlie 779er. I need immediate extraction support for 3 packages. Current locations unknown. Hostile surveillance confirmed. The response came from Captain Sarah Mitchell, a former Navy SEAL who'd transitioned into private security after her own official death during a classified operation in Syria. Ghost, good to hear your voice. We've been tracking unusual activity targeting former Special Operations personnel. 3 teams standing by for immediate deployment. Phoenix Security. This is Ghost requesting priority satellite intelligence on target facility, Carpathian Mountains. GPS coordinates following. She transmitted location data to another contact, a former CIA operative who now ran a technology firm that specialized in surveillance systems that didn't officially exist. Within 30 minutes, Natalie had assembled a response network that spanned multiple continents and included some of the most dangerous people alive, all of them former Special Operations personnel who'd been officially declared dead, now working in the shadows to protect assets that governments couldn't acknowledge. Blackbird 1. This is Ghost. I need insertion capability for a hardened target. Mountain terrain, hostile air defenses confirmed. Can you provide? Ghost, this is Colonel Amanda Cross. We have assets positioned for immediate deployment. What's your timeline? Cross had been extracted from a Chinese prison 3 years earlier in an operation that officially never happened. The debt she owed was measured in more than professional courtesy. 18 hours to target facility, Natalie replied. Full tactical package, maximum stealth approach, extraction capability for multiple hostages. Consider it done. Sending coordinates for link up with advance team. As the communication network expanded, Reed watched with growing amazement as Natalie coordinated resources that most government agencies couldn't access. Former operators who'd been declared dead, intelligence assets who worked in legal gray areas, and private military contractors who specialized in missions that couldn't be officially sanctioned. How many people do you have? He asked. Enough, Natalie replied, reviewing tactical plans that were taking shape across multiple screens. Morrison thinks he's playing chess with pieces he trained. He's about to discover that some of those pieces learned to play a different game entirely. The plan was audacious to the point of insanity, a coordinated strike against a fortified facility using resources that existed outside official military command structures. But it had the elegant simplicity that characterized the best special operations. Maximum force applied at the point of greatest enemy weakness. What about official authorization? Torres asked. If this goes wrong, we'll all be labeled as rogue operators. We already are, Natalie said simply. Morrison's made sure of that. The only question now is whether we eliminate the threat or let him finish what he started. As night fell over the Montana mountains, Chief Warrant Officer Natalie Martinez prepared to lead an operation that would either save the remaining survivors of Operation Crimson Dawn or ensure that their Betrayal was answered with the kind of justice that couldn't be found in any courtroom. Morrison had taught her everything about military tactics. Tomorrow night, she was going to teach him about consequences. The insertion into Romanian airspace happened at 0200 hours. 36 hours after Natalie had assembled her network of ghost operatives for what military planners would have classified as a suicide mission. The modified helicopter flew nap of the earth through the Carpathian Mountains. Its rotors whisper quiet, thanks to technology that officially didn't exist. Piloted by Captain Jake Harrison, a former 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment pilot who'd been declared killed in action during a classified mission in Somalia 4 years earlier. Target facility coming into visual range, Harrison announced to the tactical communication system. Distance 3 kilometers, elevation advantage confirmed. Defensive positions look exactly like the intelligence photos, but I'm seeing additional heat signatures that weren't in the briefings. Natalie studied the fortified compound through night vision optics that revealed details invisible to civilian technology. The former Soviet installation had been extensively modified, transformed from military barracks into a private prison designed to hold high-value detainees. Multiple defensive layers, automated weapon systems, and enough security personnel to repel a conventional assault by a full company of soldiers. Additional heat signatures are probably bidders arriving for Morrison's auction, she said, noting the luxury vehicles parked within the compound's secured perimeter. International arms dealers, foreign intelligence operatives, and private military contractors. The kind of people who pay premium prices for American military secrets. Colonel Reed, who'd insisted on participating despite his limited special operations background, monitored satellite intelligence feeds from his position at the helicopter's tactical workstation. Satellite shows approximately 40 personnel on site, plus an unknown number of attendees for tonight's auction. We're looking at odds of roughly 8-1. Good odds for us, replied Captain Sarah Mitchell from her position near the helicopter's jump door. Most of those 40 are probably security contractors who've never faced operators with our training level. They're expecting to guard prisoners and intimidate civilians, not fight ghosts. Mitchell's team consisted of former special operations personnel who'd transitioned into the gray world of private military contracting after their official deaths. Each had participated in classified operations that required skills most soldiers never developed: the ability to infiltrate impossible targets, eliminate specific threats without collateral damage, and disappear without leaving evidence of their presence. Phoenix team reports electronic warfare systems are in position, announced Captain Amanda Cross through encrypted satellite communication. We can disrupt their communications and automated defenses on your signal, but the window will be limited. Estimate 30 minutes of coverage before they adapt to our interference. Cross's team had positioned themselves on surrounding ridgelines with equipment that could electronically blind the facility's defensive systems. The technology was experimental, developed by private contractors who specialized in capabilities that government agencies couldn't officially acknowledge. Razor team confirms perimeter. Security mapping complete, reported Captain Mitchell. Guard rotation patterns identified, automated systems cataloged, and extraction routes verified. Target facility has significant defensive capabilities, but they're designed to prevent escape, not resist infiltration. Natalie felt the familiar calm that preceded complex operations, her mind automatically accessing tactical protocols she'd developed through years of missions that existed only in classified memories. Morrison had trained her well, but he'd made the critical error of assuming she'd remain static while he'd been planning his betrayal. Remember, Morrison is not to be eliminated until we've extracted intelligence about remaining Crimson Dawn survivors, she said, reviewing final mission parameters with her team. He's the only person who knows their current locations and the timeline for their elimination. We need him alive long enough to provide that information. What about the auction attendees? Reed asked. International criminals buying American military secrets. We can't just let them walk away. We're not, Natalie replied, her smile carrying the kind of cold satisfaction that had once terrified enemies across 3 continents. But their elimination is secondary to protecting American assets. Mission priority is extracting Morrison's intelligence, then preventing the sale of classified information. The helicopter began its final approach to the insertion point, a rocky outcropping 2 kilometers from the target facility that would provide concealment for their approach march. Through night vision equipment, Natalie could see the compound's defensive preparations, guard towers, automated weapon systems, and patrol routes that indicated professional security planning. Defensive layout suggests they're expecting conventional assault tactics, she observed, noting patterns that revealed the facility's vulnerabilities. Multiple layers designed to channel attackers into predetermined kill zones, effective against standard military operations, but vulnerable to infiltration techniques. Harrison brought the helicopter into a landing hover 6 feet above the rocky terrain, close enough for rapid deployment, but maintaining enough altitude for immediate extraction if hostile forces detected their approach. Insertion point confirmed. Time on target, 90 seconds. Natalie was first out the helicopter's side door, dropping onto mountain terrain with movements that seemed to defy gravity. 7 years of civilian life hadn't dulled her operational instincts, if anything. The enforced inactivity had left her hungry for the kind of complex challenge that defined her existence. Mitchell's team followed with fluid precision, each operator moving with the silent efficiency that characterized elite special operations units. Within 30 seconds, 6 ghosts had dissolved into terrain that would challenge experienced mountain warfare specialists. Phoenix team. Initiate electronic warfare protocols, Natalie whispered into her throat microphone as they began their approach toward the facility. All teams, communications check. Phoenix team confirms electronic jamming active. Target facility communications disrupted, automated defenses compromised. Razor team in position for overwatch. Clear fields of fire established, extraction routes secured. Blackbird team standing by for immediate extraction. Helicopter assets positioned for emergency response. The approach to the facility required traversing terrain that would have been impossible for conventional military units. Natalie led her team through approaches that existed only in the minds of operators trained to access targets that couldn't be reached through normal means. Contact front, Mitchell whispered as they encountered the facility's outer perimeter security. 2 guards, standard patrol pattern, civilian contractors based on equipment and movement. Natalie moved through the darkness with predatory grace, eliminating both sentries using techniques that left no evidence of external violence. Within minutes, the outer perimeter was secured without triggering any alarms. First defensive layer breached, she reported, advancing to secondary positions. The facility's main building had been constructed to Soviet military specifications, then modified with modern security systems that created multiple defensive layers. But the modifications had also created vulnerabilities access points that weren't part of the original design. Security systems that hadn't been properly integrated, and defensive patterns that could be exploited by operators with proper training. Target building in sight, Reed whispered as they established observation positions overlooking the main compound. Multiple heat signatures confirmed. Auction appears to be in progress. Through reinforced windows, they could see Morrison standing before an audience of international criminals, presenting intelligence materials on large display screens. American military secrets being sold to the highest bidders while the operators who'd risked their lives to obtain that intelligence were marked for systematic elimination. Morrison's presenting files on current operator locations, Natalie observed through her rifle scope. Real-time intelligence that will get people killed within hours if we don't stop this. Multiple access points identified, Mitchell reported from her position near the building's rear entrance. Service corridors, maintenance shafts, and what appears to be a concealed emergency exit. Building layout suggests Soviet-era construction with modern security overlays. Natalie studied the facility through optics that revealed details invisible to standard surveillance equipment. Morrison's auction was taking place in what had once been the installation's main briefing room, now converted into a conference facility with the kind of security systems that protected high-value transactions. Primary infiltration route confirmed, she announced. Mitchell, take your team through the service entrance and establish overwatch positions inside the building. Reed, you're with me for direct approach through the main conference room. We hit them simultaneously from multiple vectors. What about collateral damage? Reed asked, studying the crowd of international criminals through his scope. Some of those people are probably diplomats or government officials operating under official cover. Then they chose the wrong auction to attend, Natalie replied with finality. Anyone participating in the sale of American military secrets has declared themselves a hostile combatant. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. As her team moved into final assault positions, Natalie felt the familiar weight of impossible choices that had defined her military career. Somewhere in that building, Morrison was selling information that would get American operators killed. The people attending his auction were willing participants in activities that threatened national security. All teams report ready, came the coordinated response through her earpiece. Execute, Natalie whispered, beginning her final approach toward a confrontation that would either save the remaining survivors of Operation Crimson Dawn or ensure that their betrayal was answered with the kind of justice that could only be delivered by the ghosts Morrison thought he'd buried. The auction was about to become a very different kind of transaction. The assault began at exactly 3:47 hours with the kind of coordinated precision that separated elite special operations from conventional military tactics. Natalie's team moved through the facility like smoke given deadly purpose, each operator flowing through defensive positions that had been designed to stop conventional assault teams, but were vulnerable to infiltration. Techniques perfected through years of missions that officially never existed. Mitchell's team struck first, emerging from service corridors to eliminate perimeter security with suppressed weapons that made no more sound than whispered conversations. Within 90 seconds, the facility's outer defensive ring had been neutralized without triggering a single alarm. Natalie moved through the mine building's corridors with fluid efficiency, her movements guided by architectural knowledge gained through hours of intelligence analysis and instincts developed during operations in similar Soviet-era installations. The building's layout was predictable, designed by engineers who prioritized function over creativity, creating patterns that could be exploited by someone with proper training. Conference room in sight, she whispered into her throat microphone as she approached the main auction area. Multiple targets confirmed. Morrison center stage presenting classified materials to approximately 20 buyers. Through reinforced glass windows, she could see Colonel Morrison standing before an audience of international criminals, displaying intelligence files that contained the current identities and locations of every surviving Crimson Dawn operator. Real-time information that would result in multiple assassinations within hours if the auction proceeded to completion. Secondary team in position. Mitchell reported from her overwatch location inside the building's upper level. Clear fields of fire established, extraction routes secured. Ready to engage on your signal. Phoenix team reports electronic jamming holding steady, announced Cross through encrypted satellite communication. Facility communications remain disrupted, but estimate 10 minutes before they adapt to our interference patterns. Natalie studied the tactical situation through optics that revealed details invisible to standard surveillance equipment. Morrison's security detail consisted of professional military contractors, positioned at strategic points throughout the conference room. But their deployment suggested they were prepared for external assault rather than internal infiltration. "Razor team has eyes on primary target," she reported, centering her rifle scope on Morrison's chest. "Standing by for mission execution." But something was wrong. Morrison's presentation was too confident, too relaxed for someone conducting an illegal auction in a remote mountain facility. His body language suggested someone who was completely secure in his operational environment, not concerned about potential threats or interruption. "All teams, hold position," Natalie whispered, her tactical instincts screaming warnings. Something's not right. Morrison's too comfortable. Security deployment is wrong for the threat level. Reed's voice crackled through her earpiece with growing concern. "What are you seeing?" "Trap," Natalie replied, her mind automatically analyzing details that had seemed insignificant during their approach. "The auction is legitimate, but Morrison knows we're here. He's been expecting us." As if summoned by her words, Morrison looked directly at the window where she was positioned, his smile visible even through the reinforced glass. He raised a handheld device that could only be a remote detonator, his finger poised over the activation switch. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison announced to his audience of criminals, his voice carrying clearly through the facility's sound system. "Before we conclude tonight's auction, I'd like to introduce some uninvited guests who've traveled a considerable distance to attend our gathering." Floodlights erupted throughout the compound, transforming night into harsh daylight that revealed every concealment position Natalie's team had occupied. Automated weapon systems activated with mechanical precision, targeting locations that had been invisible to standard surveillance but were apparently well known to Morrison's security systems. "Contact!" Mitchell shouted as concealed defensive positions opened fire with coordinated precision. Automated systems, pre-targeted firing solutions. They knew exactly where we'd approach. Natalie rolled away from the window as high-powered rounds shattered reinforced glass, her mind racing through tactical options that seemed increasingly limited. Morrison hadn't just anticipated their assault, he'd prepared for it. Turned their own infiltration routes into carefully orchestrated kill zones. "All teams, immediate extraction," she called into her throat microphone while suppressing fire erupted from multiple directions. "Mission parameters have changed. This is now a survival situation." "Negative," Reed's voice replied through the communication chaos. "We can't extract without Morrison's intelligence. Too many American assets at risk." Through the shattered window, Natalie could see Morrison continuing his presentation as if automatic weapons fire was simply background music. The auction attendees remained seated, suggesting they'd been briefed about potential interruption and prepared for exactly this kind of demonstration. "He's not just selling intelligence," she realized with growing horror. "He's selling us." Live demonstration of how to eliminate American Special Operations personnel. The implications were staggering. Morrison wasn't just betraying individual operators. He was providing hostile intelligence services with real-time tactical analysis of American Special Operations capabilities. The assault on his facility was being recorded, analyzed, and transmitted to bidders who would use that information to counter future operations. "Phoenix team, can you jam their recording equipment?" she asked while maneuvering through corridors that had become shooting galleries designed to channel her movements into predetermined kill zones. "Negative," Cross replied. "They're using hardened systems with multiple backup networks. Whatever they're recording is being transmitted in real time to external locations." Natalie found herself trapped in a service corridor as automated. Defensive systems concentrated fire on her position with mechanical precision. The walls around her disintegrated under sustained automatic weapons fire. But the pattern was wrong, designed to pin her down rather than eliminate her immediately. "They want me alive," she said into her microphone, understanding Morrison's true objective. "This isn't elimination, it's capture." He needs a living demonstration of interrogation techniques for his buyers. Mitchell's team was engaging multiple defensive positions throughout the facility, but their suppressed weapons were inadequate against automated systems that didn't require human operators to maintain accuracy. Professional military contractors were coordinating with electronic surveillance to create overlapping fields of fire that eliminated traditional infiltration routes. "Building is compromised," Mitchell reported. "Extraction routes are covered by automated systems. Security deployment is too heavy for breakthrough assault." Reed's voice carried the strain of someone coordinating a mission that had transformed from tactical operation into desperate survival exercise. Options? Natalie studied her tactical situation while automatic weapons fire continued to reduce her concealment to rubble. Morrison had planned this demonstration perfectly, using his knowledge of her operational methods to create an inescapable scenario that would showcase American special operations vulnerabilities to the highest bidders. "I'm going to give him what he wants," she said, making the kind of decision that had once earned her legendary status in the special operations community. "Negative," Reed replied immediately. "We don't leave people behind." "You're not leaving me behind," Natalie corrected, moving toward the conference room with purposeful determination. "I'm completing the mission." She emerged from the service corridor with her weapons raised, but not targeting specific threats, moving with the controlled surrender of someone who understood that tactical situations sometimes required strategic sacrifice. Morrison's security detail immediately focused on her position, but their orders were apparently to capture rather than eliminate. "Outstanding," Morrison announced as she entered the conference room under armed escort. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present Chief Warrant Officer Natalie Martinez, callsign Ghost, one of the most decorated special operations personnel in American military history." The auction attendees studied her with the clinical interest of professionals evaluating a valuable commodity. Intelligence operatives from hostile nations, arms dealers who specialized in American military equipment, and private military contractors who would use her tactical knowledge to counter future operations. 7 years of hiding, and you walked right into the demonstration I designed specifically for you, Morrison continued with obvious satisfaction. "My buyers wanted to see how American special operations personnel could be neutralized under optimal circumstances. You've provided an excellent case study." Natalie met his eyes with the kind of calm that had once terrified enemies across 3 continents. "The demonstration isn't over yet, Colonel." Her smile was sharp as winter steel as she activated the dead man switch concealed in her tactical vest, a device connected to enough explosives to level the entire facility. Morrison's expression shifted from satisfaction to horrified understanding as he realized his perfect demonstration was about to become a very different kind of lesson. "Ladies and gentlemen," Natalie announced to the room full of criminals, "let me show you what happens when you threaten American operators." The explosion that followed would be visible from orbit, but by then Chief Warrant Officer Natalie Martinez had already proven that some demonstrations were worth dying for. The explosion that leveled Morrison's facility in the Carpathian Mountains was recorded by satellite surveillance systems across 3 continents, but the official reports would list it as a natural gas leak at an abandoned industrial complex. No government agency would acknowledge the destruction of an international intelligence auction, and no military organization would admit that one of their most decorated operators had sacrificed herself to prevent the sale of American secrets. But Natalie Martinez had learned long ago that the most effective operations were the ones that left room for multiple interpretations. 3 weeks later, a woman with short blonde hair and different colored contact lenses walked into a small cafe in Prague, Czech Republic, carrying identification that listed her name as Dr. Sarah Thompson, a medical researcher specializing in trauma recovery. She moved with the careful precision of someone still healing from significant injuries, but her eyes held the alert awareness that never fully disappeared from people who'd survived too many impossible situations. Captain Sarah. Mitchell looked up from her corner table with the kind of relief that came from seeing ghosts return to life. I was wondering when you'd make contact. The whole network's been worried since the satellite feeds went dark. Had to make sure Morrison's network was completely eliminated before surfacing, Natalie replied, settling into the cafe chair with movements that suggested recent medical procedures. Took longer than expected to confirm all the buyers from that auction were identified and neutralized. The dead man switch was a nice touch, Mitchell observed with professional admiration. Made it look like you'd gone down with the facility. Intelligence services across 4 countries spent weeks trying to confirm whether Ghost was actually dead. Natalie's smile carried the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully manipulated international intelligence agencies into reaching exactly the wrong conclusions. Sometimes the best way to survive is to let everyone believe you didn't. The explosion had been carefully calculated enough destructive force to eliminate Morrison and his criminal network, but positioned to allow escape through a reinforced safe room she'd identified during her infiltration. The facility's Soviet-era construction had included emergency bunkers designed to withstand nuclear attack, providing exactly the kind of protection needed to survive a controlled demolition. What about the other Crimson Dawn survivors? Natalie asked, reviewing intelligence reports that Mitchell had compiled during her recovery period. All accounted for and secure, Mitchell replied. Morrison's network included cells in 7 countries, but they all depended on his central intelligence database. When that went up with the facility, his entire operation collapsed within 72 hours. The systematic elimination of Morrison's network had required coordination among assets positioned across multiple continents, each operating with the kind of precision that characterized elite special operations. Former operators who'd been declared dead had emerged from the shadows long enough to protect their own, then disappeared back into civilian lives that no longer required constant vigilance. Reed survived the extraction? Natalie asked, remembering the colonel who'd recruited her for what had become a very different mission than originally planned. Barely. Took 3 rounds during the facility assault, but his team got him out alive. He's been asking questions about your status, probably planning to recommend you for medals that can't be publicly acknowledged. Natalie laughed with genuine humor for the first time in weeks. Military decorations for operations that officially never happened. The ultimate irony of Special Operations Service. Through the cafe's windows, she could see Prague's ancient streets bustling with normal civilian life, people concerned with ordinary problems, like work schedules and family obligations, blissfully unaware that their peaceful existence depended on operators who fought battles that couldn't be acknowledged or celebrated. So what's next? Mitchell asked. Blackwater Operations has openings for someone with your skill set. Private consulting, government contracts that exist in gray areas. The kind of work that pays well and doesn't appear on official records. I've been thinking about that, Natalie replied. Reviewing options that ranged from continued special operations work to complete civilian retirement. 7 years serving coffee taught me something important sometimes. The most valuable thing you can do is provide people with exactly what they need when they need it, without expecting recognition or gratitude. Mitchell studied her former teammate with the kind of understanding that came from shared experiences most people couldn't comprehend. You're going back to civilian life. I'm going home, Natalie corrected, feeling the weight of decisions settling into place like pieces of a complex puzzle. To a community that protected me without knowing what they were protecting. To people who gave me a family when I thought I'd lost everything. The thought of returning to Clearwater Falls carried both appeal and uncertainty. The town had been evacuated during Morrison's assault. Its residents relocated to temporary housing while federal agencies conducted cleanup operations that would officially be classified as environmental remediation. But small mountain communities had a way of rebuilding themselves, especially when they had something worth preserving. Mabel's diner was destroyed in the fighting, Mitchell said gently. Understanding the symbolic importance of the place where Natalie had spent 7 years learning to be human again. Buildings can be rebuilt, Natalie replied. What matters is whether the people who made it special want to come home. She pulled out a secure satellite phone, accessing communication networks that would allow her to contact the evacuated residents of Clearwater Falls. Sheriff Tom Brennan's number was programmed in her memory, along with contact information for dozens of people who'd unknowingly given her sanctuary during the most dangerous years of her life. Tom. It's Natalie, she said when the sheriff answered on the second ring. I wanted you to know that the people responsible for what happened to our town have been eliminated. It's safe to come home. The silence that followed lasted long enough for her to wonder if the connection had been lost. When Brennan finally responded, his voice carried the weight of someone whose world had been turned upside down and was slowly rotating back toward normal. Natalie, honey, we've been worried sick. Federal agents told us you were killed in the fighting, that you died protecting classified information. Are you really all right? I'm fine, Tom. Banged up a little, but fine. What about everyone else? Mabel, the logging crews, Mrs. Patterson? Everyone's accounted for. Most folks are staying with relatives in Missoula, waiting to hear whether they can return. Insurance adjusters are saying it'll take months to rebuild. But you know how mountain people are, we don't give up easy. Through the secure connection. Natalie could hear the sounds of community in the background, familiar voices discussing reconstruction plans. Children playing despite temporary displacement. The resilient noise of people who decided that setbacks were just opportunities to build something better. Tell Mabel I'll be home in time to help reopen the diner, Natalie said, feeling the last pieces of her decision clicking into place. And tell everyone else that their waitress is coming back to work. Natalie, Brennan said quietly, we never did find out who you really were. What you did before you came to Clearwater Falls. Federal agents wouldn't tell us anything except that you saved a lot of lives. I was someone who forgot how to be part of a community. Natalie replied honestly. You taught me how to remember. After ending the call, she sat in the Prague Cafe for another hour, watching normal people live normal lives while she planned her return to a different kind of normal. Dr. Sarah Thompson would disappear as completely as she'd appeared. Another identity that had served its purpose and could be discarded without regret. You sure about this? Mitchell asked as they prepared to leave. Civilian life can be boring after what we've been through. 7 years ago. I thought boring was the same as dead, Natalie replied, standing with movements that suggested her injuries were healing properly. Turns out boring is just another word for peaceful. As she walked through Prague's ancient streets toward transportation that would eventually take her home to Montana, Chief Warrant Officer Natalie Martinez felt the satisfaction of someone who'd completed her final mission. Not the destruction of Morrison's network or the protection of classified intelligence, but the more complex operation of learning how to live with honor in a world that would never know her real name. Some battles were fought with weapons and tactics that appeared in military manuals. Others were fought with coffee pots and morning conversations, serving people who needed exactly what you could provide without expecting anything in return. 6 months later, a rebuilt Mabel's Diner opened its doors in Clearwater Falls, Montana, serving the best coffee in the mountains to people who appreciated both the consistency of their morning routine and the quiet competence of the woman who made it possible. The new waitress was friendly but not overly personal, efficient but not mechanical, and possessed the kind of situational awareness that made even the toughest loggers feel safe when she was working their section. She remembered everyone's order, anticipated their needs, and deflected personal questions with a smile that was warm but carefully controlled. Her name was Natalie Rivers, and if anyone noticed that she moved with the fluid precision of someone trained for more dangerous work, they kept that observation to themselves. Mountain communities understood the value of privacy, and some stories were worth protecting even when you didn't know what they meant. But every Sunday evening, when the diner closed and Clearwater Falls settled into its weekend quiet, Natalie would walk through the mountains that had given her sanctuary, grateful for the chance to serve coffee in a place where heroes could retire without fanfare and ghosts could learn to be human again. Some missions never really ended. They just transformed into something more important. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.